Um, and are these products that come out of uh, lab work, are they like patented or licensed or anything? Like Smart Citizen, for example, or?
A Smart Citizen follows the same approach that Arduino follows, and of course we copied from them because they are good friends and because it's good to copy when people that things you like. So basically, a Smart Citizen, it's fully open source and open hardware. If you go to the docs.smartcitizen, where all the components are described, there are the licenses for each part. But the brand Smart Citizen, it's licensed. I mean, it registered just in Europe. In this case, I mean, I don't think we ever actually went and did it like fully worldwide. But what this does to you, it is anyone could actually go and download the Smart Citizen Kit 2.1 repository on GitHub, open the Eagle files, and basically generate a new Gerber and go and manufacture it. They could even go into the Smart Citizen software repositories and bootstrap the platform into their own instance. So they could run their platform in their servers, either for local community or worldwide, like a company, to do whatever they want. But as we own the brand, they won't be able to use Smart Citizen. And as a software they are using, it's open source. If they contribute to it, they need actually to release the contributions they do to it. So let's imagine that there's some company that actually starts to fork a Smart Citizen hardware and starts to sell this Smart Citizen hardware and starts to contribute into it because it's basically modifying them to actually measure better indoor air pollution or, let's say, water pollution. They might need to contribute those, and they won't be able to use a Smart Citizen brand, so it's clear it's a different venture. It's quite a risky model, and Arduino, for example, suffered from it. If you search for, I don't know what will be the best keyword, but we could share you an article on Hackaday that basically follows up a big issue that happened to Arduino some years back, due exactly to these issues that arise from open hardware and licensing and rules, let's say, not being yet clear, because of course it's still something quite new, and so issues might arise as on any, let's say, innovation. But at the same time, it's new and risky. It has benefits. In particular, for small projects like a Smart Citizen, I think it's extremely beneficial because it helps a lot to grow the community around the product you are building or the solution or the tool.
I think that's what. Yeah, I think that's what I was thinking. Like the hardware could be people making them themselves, but what if they don't contribute to the project and just start their separate?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the big issue right now mostly happens on software and software platforms, because let's say with traditional software, you would download the software into your computer. If it was open source, you might be able to download the source and compile it. When you use open source software on the cloud, like you do many days, like a Smart Citizen is, for example, there might be some times where you actually are using tools built upon open source projects which claim to be open source, but you, in a way, have not full access to the source code sometimes. There's a lot of issues arising right now or in the past years.
Do you think it's because of a scale, like open source, it's good for like a particular scale, but then later on it becomes difficult?
No, I would say no, not really. Like if you look, in fact, the most successful projects which are open source, and maybe Victor could cover this more, they are really big projects. I mean, some in fact of the biggest software projects nowadays are open source, if not, I would say somehow all of them. Because if you look at the Linux kernel and the top, let's say, server solutions used over the world to orchestrate servers, to run web services, etc., are fully open source.
I think about the tools also that you've been using
Blender, Grasshopper,
while compiling in your Arduino. For example, GCC is fully open as well. Maybe Victor, you want to say something to this, because I saw you.
Well, just to say that most of your devices run in free software. Most of the phones, of the TVs, of the even any your washing machine is almost sure running some piece of free software. So I think the thing about scale is completely the opposite. The projects that have growth faster in the world in the last 20 or 30 years are more related to the open world, let's say, to the free world, than the closed one.
I think maybe the missing subject is to bring it, let's say, to bring this open source layer more close to the user or more close to the end applications. So it's, if you look, it's quite weird, at least if you are new into the field, when you think actually that all the Android phones might be running the Linux kernel, that all the web services that you use by major companies from Google to Facebook might be built on top of many open source technologies, either built by them or by others. But then when it comes into your desktop, still, when you want to edit an image, you might install Photoshop, and you might do 3D on Rhino or Fusion. And open source, it's available, and we use it, but you might feel it a little bit farther away than those. And I guess this is also because open source have been working really well among developers communities. So people that actually, it's not just using the tool, but knows actually how to manipulate the tool, how to adjust it, so how to contribute to the tool at the end, no? And so, sorry, go ahead, Victor.
Also, if you think about it, the marketing and the communication and the public relation systems that private companies have is very big. So we have a lot of impact in the media around the tools that they develop, but it's not the same in the case of open source projects. So there's a lot of really big open source projects that no one have heard about them, even if they are using it on a daily basis. No? A lot of people doesn't know what is Apache or Nginx or any of the web servers that runs 98% of the World Wide Web. No?
In a way, I would say that
doing merchandising. No? Sorry.
In a way, I think the important thing there that we saw in the past years, no, it's how like big companies that used to embrace closed source software, like if you think back on the 90s, no one actually was looking at open source the way we do now. I started to embrace open source because they saw it was a way to get free contributions from their communities. So like the builders of big tools, like let's say from the Linux project, but also many more, like actually, because the Linux was already open source by default, but some applications were not meant to be open source by default, or maybe no one thought they could be. But these big companies, they realized that in a way, by changing open source from this idea of this kind of more, let's say, utopian developers to be actually something that business will embrace. And in fact, that's why they changed from the wording of free software to the wording of open source now. So it doesn't look that much this kind of tool just for these utopic developers. They basically managed to create developer communities around them, which are not officially paid by them, but contribute to their code base. So the first thing when a company now releases a new tool for developers, let's say Facebook releases React, which is a framework used to build many web front ends and applications that had a big explosion around 5 years ago, and still it's a leader on the market. So Facebook started to pour money to actually get developers to use that framework and to contribute to that framework. So because of course the money they invest in there has a return of investment, no? Because actually these developers might contribute more to this framework. I guess in a way what we need is that we need to create a similar ecosystem into let's say other software that is open source, but it's not run by these big companies, nor target to developers. So if we all in a way start to be a little bit proficient into contributing to the Blender source code, it actually we could turn into a system that's more similar to this one. No, but when we talk about like desktop applications, it's most like just the users and then the developers, and we in a way need to put maybe these two things more together by creating easier ways for the users to contribute and back and forth.
Another example that I would love to push into this discussion is Kicad. Kicad was a small software, and it get a lot of support via the CERN institution, an academic institution, very big, and it's growing really, really fast, and it's improving a lot. No? So there's a lot of different ways and models to finance the development of free software. The thing is, once they are there, once they have enough community and enough people to use them, they grow very, very fast compared to closed solutions. No?
Last question. I was wondering, is it the same for hardware or like products as well?
No, it's not the same, there are some things that can be translated, but there's a main difference. Software can be replicated for free, hardware can't. No? So that changes all the rules, and there's a lot of things that are influenced by this fact, by this physical fact. So there's a lot of people pioneering in terms of creating the ideas on how to do the same, let's say, how to apply the same principles you apply on the free software world to free hardware. And I think there's a lot of examples of succeeding groups like Adafruit, like Arduino, like SparkFun, like things like that. But still, it doesn't cover all the spectrum, and it doesn't apply to all the realities. So it's something that's a work in progress. And to be short, the answer is no. It doesn't. It's not the same, and the hardware options are less developed still than the software options, because free software has a long history in terms of, well, a long history by, I'm talking about 20, 30 years, and the open source hardware is a lot more, history is a lot more short.
What we could say, sorry, but it's that the impact of open source hardware, it's really visible already. Because if you think the impact of projects like Arduino and what actually meant to an engineer to be able to look at how things are built and copy them and reassembly them, it's having an impact in the way we develop hardware. And when I say we, let's not just think about Fab Labs, let's think even about companies. The time to market that now it's taking to actually develop hardware solutions and actually selling them, if you look at the Chinese market, it's possible because in a way or another, people have access to the source about how other electronics are built and can replicate them. At that time, you had to pay and sign an agreement with a big company to actually just get the plans about how to integrate, let's say, an accelerometer with your microcontroller, which these things used to happen, let's say, back on the 90s maybe. This was, let's say, much slower to do. I mean, I'm not saying that this thing happened really new. Let's say it happened just in the last years. I mean, if you look at the story of like personal computers, it's full of this back and forth of people copying and sharing plans. But actually, I think we could see the impact right now.
And one good example of what Guillem's talking is RISC-V development. Is the first development around designing a full open chip, let's say, a full open processor architecture. That is starting and it's growing, and it's fully on the industrial model, because you cannot produce microcontrollers at home. You need a really big infrastructure to do that. But still, even in those areas, it's growing very fast and in the last couple of years, let's say. No?
Because if you think in hardware in general, what happens, right, is that if you run Blender in a machine running Linux and you are not installing any proprietary blobs to support your graphic card, because luckily you could run it, actually all the code from the user interface down to the instructions that trigger actually the processor are fully open source. But when we look into hardware and we say that a Smart Citizen or Arduino is open hardware, actually it's open hardware that is designed on Kicad. But what's inside this Atmel microcontroller, it's fully closed source, or this ARM microcontroller. So in a way, we are talking about open hardware as we will be talking about open software, where let's say the Python that puts all the things together, or the processing, or the, let's say, the whatever language you like to use, whatever, let's say, high-level language you like to use, it's open, but actually the blobs that run the hardcore part of it are closed source, no? And we won't be calling this maybe fully open source software, but in hardware, we are still at this level nowadays. I think it's important for everyone to realize. And that means actually that when we tell an Atmel microcontroller or an ARM microcontroller to do something, we are not fully sure about what's going inside, because we cannot actually, let's say, look at the source about how this was implemented. So we just have to accept and test the microcontroller and then accept that our tests are okay. So we could actually validate that what it's meant to do is what actually it's doing. And of course, on these microcontrollers we use, it's pretty simple. But now imagine a microcontroller that's running, let's say, much more serious part inside your computer, or even your processor, or even the chips inside the routers that are driving all the traffic on the internet exchange points. Let's say it really is that they could be, something there that's spying on us or doing something bad on us, or maybe something not bad, but something that we don't know, and not even the ones who install it know. And this is because no one can look what's inside that, let's say, silicon parts.
And I think one of the important things about this discussion, well, your questions are a good excuse to start the class. No, at the end we're already talking about the class and not about your questions. So let me be a little bit on a side of your questions on answering those. I think the discussion should not only be around wellness generation and incomes for companies, but about the different aspects of which impact has development in software or in hardware on the creator, but also on the user and on a society as a whole, no? And which models promote more people developing stuff, which models make economies grow, which models distribute the wellness, etc. No, it's not just, I think this discussion shouldn't be only from the point of view of I created this thing and I want to make money with it, no? So I think we have to open it to all the different parts of it. So feel free to do it. Which are the things that worry you the most? Which are the things that are more important? For example, why does Arduino did what they did? Do they open everything, and what were the consequences of that? No, if you see microbit development is different from Arduino development, and the impact on society has been very different. And the idea behind the Arduino movement was not only to make money. I'm sure they wanted to make some money because they need to live, and we all need to live. But the idea behind it was to give tools to people, no? So they can do stuff, whatever they want, but they can have the control over their own tools. And I think that's one of the main things that the full idea of learning to do things by yourself is behind it. No, is the idea of you have to control your tools if you really want to control what you're doing. Your tools from the microcontroller, as Guillem said, from all the software tools to the machines that you're using, and also your product should try to replicate that same principle. No? That's the idea of the romantic, open source, freedom fighter guys, like some of us try to push. No? Obviously, that is the opposite of the idea that people will only be motivated by the idea of being a rich guy. And that's the full idea that the patent world pushes, no? That you're not gonna make any effort to develop anything unless you think you're gonna get a lot of money in exchange. And in that matter, I think the discussion should move a little bit into more why people does what they do. No? Why do we develop stuff? What fuels creativity? Is money? Is wellness? Is benefit? Individual benefit? What it is? And I think that's one of the main important answers, questions to make to yourself. And if you have a clear answer on that, then choosing a license is very easy. Please, someone interrupt me.
I was going to ask you, what do you think people, why do you think people do open source?
Why do I think people do open source?
Because wait. Why don't you answer that question first, Benji?
That's a good question.
No, why do you think?
I think it's being part of a community where you can all work together and bounce ideas, and you're going to help somebody, but at some point somebody's going to help you as well. And I guess also the fulfillment of making something and being part of like some software, something people's going to use.
I think my answer comes from a lot before of that. We are social animals, and evolution has showed us that working together is a lot more productive and better than working just for individuals. It's the same as wolf. We live together, we work together. So looking for ways to work without only taking advantage of others I think is on or historic nature, let's say, or we have learned that around evolution. But it's not a really good answer for your question, but not so close to our reality. But I think it comes from really time ago. No, it's my question will be the other one. Why do you think people think when they invent something that it's better to close it and keep it controlled and avoid people to use it unless they pay you? Why do you think they do that? No? Or why it's good to do
giving
that?
things away for free doesn't feel like a long-term viable thing. You know, you need to earn money and eat and feed your family, and people seeing doing things for free not a very viable thing. You know, like more tangibly, I wouldn't kind of do my job like making videos or whatever for free for other people, because it doesn't make sense, because otherwise I can't eat anything.
I think what we forget many times is that this model that we take for granted is just part, again, of a model of the system we live in. And of course, we all can decide at what points you want to stretch the system. You stretch it every day by small decisions you take. And this is one of them. So, I mean, the idea actually of contributing to common resources in a community fashion, let's say, is not something that we invented, let's say, on the last 10 years in Silicon Valley. It's actually something much on the roots of how many societies work, right? The idea of understanding that you have a wealth where you take water to water your fields, and that's a common resource, and that the community actually needs it, and the community protects it, and that it needs a sort of a form of governance, either if it is a more complex one or a simple one. It's really old. You could research about the idea of the commons, for example. In particular, like many people usually takes the example of the commons in the UK, as it was better maybe documented, but sure, many societies have this idea of the commons. So in a way, when we talk about open source, as Victor said, we also need to talk about the idea of authorship, and we also need to talk about the idea of how and why we decided to start keeping the things that we do hidden from others, especially in software. As Victor said before, the cost of replicating a software, it's no cost. So it's interesting to question it.
I think Natalia wanted to say something earlier, maybe?
Sorry,
I think Natalia wanted to say something earlier.
please.
I don't want to interrupt, but
Well, I just want to use 2 minutes to answer.
Exactly. Okay.
No, go ahead. I'm sorry, I'm not used to this kind of class.
No, I was just saying that I actually wanted to talk about something else. So I guess just let's just finish this and I'll ask later.
Okay. Talking about money, just to answer very shortly what Benjamin said, this idea that free hardware and free software should be free in terms of money is a misunderstood, is not understanding completely how it works. No, money is going to be involved. You're going to get money from your work, but in a different way, not just saying, if you don't pay me, I won't give it to you. So there's a lot of techniques to get money and to get paid for your work that doesn't obligate you to forbid people to use your work. No? So I think this is one of the big misconceptions that are around. If you do open source, then you have to give things for free. No, you can ask for money. It's the thing of that everyone says is not like free beer. It's like freedom of speech. No? That's the free that we're searching for. So how do you make money? Differently than you make it just by a simple exchange, of course. And there's a lot of alternatives, and those, some of them work pretty well in some areas. In software, some of those work very well. In hardware, it's a little bit more difficult because you still have a physical thing to exchange. So how do you, but the thing is, alternatives are growing, but the idea is not to make things just for free.
Could you maybe mention some of the alternatives you know?
Of course, yeah. For example, I think one of the, well, there's several examples, but the examples that are very close to what we use every day at the Fab Lab is Adafruit. For example, Adafruit releases all the products they design as free hardware, and they are growing really fast as a big company that distributes hardware, and they are using exactly the same model as Arduino, and that's the model that Guillem described at the beginning of the class. This model of opening all the designs, keep your brand as a trademark, just as a way to say, this is signed by me, so I guarantee the quality that you are used to, that I deliver. But I allow anyone else to use my designs to produce it and to change it, with the only condition that they should share also their findings. And if you see what is happening, there's a lot of different communities that are being interlaced, and you see Raspberry Pi taking their products and Adafruit taking advantage of those and building shields on top of those. And there another guy makes a software on top of the shield of the Adafruit, and then you create a full community of people that's delivering products, not just by trying to close those products, but by trying to generate more products on top of them. No? So at the end, development is a lot faster, and you have to keep innovating, because the model of closing is the model of, let's say, I design this, and then I can close it for some years, and just I'm the only one who sells it. And the model of open is, I design this, I put it on sale, and someone is going to copy it, or can copy it very fast. So I need to design another thing really fast, because if I am good in what I'm doing, I can release another one that's superior to the previous one very fast. And I'm obligated to do it, because if not, someone else can start doing the first one. No? And another thing that a lot of companies are doing is offering services around the product itself. It's not only the board of hardware that you're selling, but you're selling services around it, support services, I don't know, services around web services that you can use with their product.
Yeah, what I think in a way, it's extremely important you understand the difference between making money with something you build and open source. And these two things are not contradictory. First of all, the most important thing when you create something, right, is you want an audience, you want a community, you want someone who use it, right? I mean, when you are a musician, the thing you want is not first to make a lot of money, I think. It's actually to have people that listen to you. And then, of course, if people like you, you might make money or not. But anyway, that's a second discussion. So it's important to think into that, in the idea that you might build some software. And the first thing, actually, if you want this project to be resilient, if you want this project to be sustainable, that you want to do, is not to be alone at your house, actually just keep pushing this. You want other people that share some of your, let's say, ideas to be able to contribute into that. That's one thing. Then the other thing is that for some people, in order to use that tool, it's much convenient that you offer it in certain forms that require payment. And that's really common nowadays. What I said, I think sounds a bit abstract, but it's, let's say, how most of the open source is, let's say, funded right now. WordPress maybe would be the quick example. WordPress runs two projects, WordPress.com, WordPress.org. You download WordPress.org, you install it into your server, you have a content management system that's used by, let's say, I don't know, half of the web, let's say. If actually you don't want to do that process, you want something simple and straightforward because you don't have the skills or you don't want to spend the time, you go to WordPress.com, you pay some money, and they run WordPress for you, and you don't even have to type a line of code nor configure a server. So that's, and this is perfectly, let's say, this model actually scales to many, many projects we use nowadays. You maybe heard from the idea of software as a service. It's basically how many open source projects are supported right now. They have the full, let's say, code, which is fully open for anyone to look, download, and run into our servers, into their servers, sorry. But then you could actually pay them, pay the company who created the software in a way to run the software for you. So this includes many of the software used to build the internet. Like, for example, software used to store massive amounts of data, or software used to actually process data, or to do machine learning and identify maybe some features on images, etc. There's many projects that follow that model. Because something important to understand is that actually Protecting your software or protecting your designs doesn't mean that no one could be able to copy you. I mean, at the end, if you have this great idea and you think that the only way you'll actually make money out of it and be sustainable over time is by protecting really well your idea, that won't work. It's true that you could have a great idea, protect some parts of your idea, and still you can make money and be sustainable. But actually, let's imagine that you create this super cool product that includes some software and some hardware, and you just spend 1 year patenting it and making all the software closed source, and you just working alone because you don't have yet that much money, and you have to write the code yourself because you cannot afford other developers, and it's closed source, so no one is actually contributing, and then you make a big patent out of it. It's quite easy that at the end, when you arrive to China and you start to manufacture your product, just talking here with like really a standard, let's say, just being the less utopic I could be, let's say, so you go to China and you manufacture in China, it's super easy that if the product is successful, someone in China is copying your product just by actually modifying some bits and bytes, and that someone actually at the end, if sees that the idea is promising, it's in a way copying your software. And that's on the copying your software, I mean, basically rewriting your software and even maybe making it better because it has more money than the one you have. So I'm not saying that patents are useless. They work for a specific model and for some specific designs. But it's important in general that sometimes people at the scale we are spend too much time, in my opinion, thinking about if they should patent something or not, and into kinds of ideas where actually it's better to spend this time building a community and releasing your thing as open source. And that if the idea is successful, it won't prevent you from making money out of it by building, let's say, a revenue system around a subscription service, by doing the support, et cetera, There's many models that we could talk.
Another example I would love to put in front is obviously Blender. No? Blender is a sustainable company that I open in my browser now the development fund of Blender, and they have an income of 93,000 euros a month just via donations. No? So they can sustain a company of 25, 30 people with good salaries just because people donate money to them. No? So that's a reality. It's not just idealism, it's a reality. You can do software and do a normal company that produces software just because people gives you donations. That means they are giving you something in exchange of your product, but it's an optional way. So everyone can use it, and if you want to pay, you can pay. And I think communities with this idea can have the possibility to grow if the product they offer is good enough, and if they build this community. It's not just a company that tries to get something out of you, but it's a community that works together. No?
It's also a really good model to keep ownership of to the users and control. Let's imagine that all the money you pay to Adobe Creative Cloud or any of these packages that we might use for design, actually you could trace from every let's say dollar that you pay to them, how it was used, and you have access to the full source code. So if one day Adobe decides to quit or to change some features that you don't like, you could keep to the source code, fix it. And so imagine the freedom that this guarantees to you and to the whole user base, even though you are paying them some money, the same you do with other, let's say, closed source products.
And at the end, if you balance from a global point of view, for example, comparing Adobe Photoshop or whatever with Blender or Maya or whichever software you think is comparable, and you see the impact on users, on society, and on the people that produces the software, you can see the main difference. No? In Blender, you have 20 or 30 people that's being paid to develop a software. You have a final product that's used by millions of people all over the world without limitations. And no one is being, let's say, estafado. How do you say that in English? No one is being ripped apart, no? Sorry? And if you see the other model, you have, I don't know how many developers, I think a lot more of developers being well paid, and you have a really big group of people paying a lot more money than the one that the developers are receiving. No? So there's a really big part of money that's getting lost in the translation from users to producers that obviously this is the idea that capitalism pushes, that extra money is the thing that motivates people to do companies. But this other model seems to be very well motivated also, in terms of the people working on it is very happy doing it, and they feel very motivated to do it. And you don't have this escape of a lot of money that doesn't end up in any of the parts involved in the process. No? You have money that's provided by users and money that's used by developers, and you have a product.
I think it's a good moment also to try and bring other opinions in. There's, I think we are like around 30, 35 people in this meeting right now, and I have heard only about from 5 or 6, and all of them are very much in line. I know that all these ideas that Victor and Guillem are talking about and Fenning are very easy to follow, because we are more or less in line with them, a lot of these principles. But I'm 100% sure that there's a lot of people that have something to say about it. Like at least someone could say, oh, but sometimes open source doesn't work, or sometimes this is not good, or sometimes these other things, whatever. So I would like to hear about those other opinions as well.
Why don't you
anyone? Well, because I don't think that way.
Well, I'm used to work with other kind of license that is not exactly open source. I use more with Creative Commons because I'm used to work with illustrations or with comics and intellectual property that is difficult to manage. So in another way that is not software. So if you write Harry Potter, you really like to know that Harry Potter and what is canon about Harry Potter is what you wrote. And also in terms of income, there is another way of this kind of services and another way of servicing and ask for money. In this case, I know people that works that makes comics for free, or makes or writes things in general, and they ask money via crowdsourcing or via what's the name in English?
Micro donations, maybe?
No, micro donations via, and also there is the Patreon way. So
micro crowding.
Micro crowding, yeah, it's something like that. But the idea of
crowdfunding, yeah, I think.
Yeah, crowdfunding is when you have a big project and you have a big milestone. So you, for example, you are going to print your book, or you make your comic, or make your game. And you need money and you need funding for this specific project. And also there is the other way that is also like Blender, that is, I want to create content every day, and for example, I'm a YouTuber and I want to create content. So you are paid to improve and put more effort in what you do. So in those cases, is something like Adafruit. You need to make something like a trademark of what you do. This is easier in intellectual property, because when you write Harry Potter, you are J.K. Rowling, and if everybody else does it, it's not Harry Potter, it's something else, it's a fanfic. But it's also helpful, because even if you write, I don't know, articles about politics, people know what you are doing and what are the analyses that you are doing. So I think it's also useful to know that if you get an audience big enough, and by using also licenses that are open, not in the sense of modifying, but in the sense of distributing, you may have that audience, that community that can help you out, even if they cannot modify your work because you wrote something and it's not so feasible to modify it without making a fanfic that is other work of fiction that is from other person. So it's not as simple as I make this chip, you make this chip, and I look for you how you make your chip, and I make my chip better. So it's not the same language.
It's like open source Netflix.
More or less. When you look in YouTube, for example, I think that almost the third of the people that I look in YouTube, they have a Patreon of somehow, and the people that are some kind of established or they have big, huge audiences, they ask the people to contribute to make more things. If you see I don't know, Lindsay Ellis, you say Patrick Williams, you say one of those independent creators, they depend of the community that they have created.
And how do you do with your work? Do you sell your work? You have it in, you mentioned earlier, Creative Commons.
Yeah, for example, in my case, I usually use Creative Commons because I don't know what is going to happen, and Creative Commons makes things because, for example, if I make a comic and somebody wants to publish it, they might have an income from my work, and I don't see any penny. So I don't grant the permission to sell my work, to publish it and sell it for its own sake, for my own story. But if you ask me, I can manage something. So in the license is what I give, what the author gives you by default without asking. So usually Creative Commons is I give you the permission to share it with all of you, instead of if you see something and you copy this DVD, it's forbidden. No, watch it, and if you want more, I will ask for it, and if you redistribute it, I will allow it freely. So this is the kind of things I usually do, but the comics I do is they don't have a big audience, because even if you use this kind of license, you might have success with your comic or not. You are not supposed to have a big audience because you use this kind of license, and also if you use open source, it's not assured that it's going to be a big project because it's open source. It could be not, and in either way, it's.
I think, David, another example that is similar to that, or to a part of what you said, but applied to software, is this program called Sublime Text, which was a code editor that got I mean, right now it's not as used, but it was pretty popular at one point. And the guy that did it, basically, he did the program, and it's not open. I don't think it's open source. He was selling it, but he basically had this license where he had the program, the complete program online. So you could download it for free. And the only restriction was that every time you open, you had like an alert saying, hey, if you like the program, buy it, right? So you could actually download it for free. It wasn't open source. You could download it for free, but the guy actually was selling it. So it was like this license where you can actually use it as long as you want. I've used it for years, and I didn't buy it. I never had any, like, there's no blog functionality or anything. But the guy is actually saying like, hey, if you're actually using it and you want to buy it, buy it. So it's a weird thing, but I don't know, it worked for the guy. So that may be another way for software.
I just want to add something to that. It's a good example, I think, Sublime Text, because it's not open source. In fact, this guy never released the source code. In fact, there has been a lot of people asking him to do it and saying to him, hey, we want to pay you. We can even pay you a lot more than what you're asking for, because your work is pretty good, but please open the source, because if you stop developing this, we are lost without a good tool that we love. No? So that model is more close to the model of normal interchange, but giving you the software for free without any extra right, for the sake of making it popular, let's say, no?
Just one comment in what Victor said. I think it's important. We are talking all the time as about open source as creators, but we're also users of open source, right? So, and by users, I don't mean the Blender case or the, let's say, Kicad case, but also as developers, we also use tools, no, that are open source, and sometimes we even embed them inside or whatever we are building, right? And so there it's and connecting with what Victor was saying about how open source enable that what you are using is not a black box, and so it's easy to guarantee there's going to be a legacy, a sustainability on this project. It's extremely important. And it's not extremely important just for you. It's important even at the case that one day you go and for a specific project you are working, you go and want to look for investors for your project, or let's say contributors. But let's use the word investors. I think that you want actually to go the standard startup way. Well, if you actually tell your investors that you are built on top of all these tools created by all these big companies, that they might change, might be deprecated at some time, they might tell you, take care, because you have a what usually they call vendor lock, right? It's like, I built all my system on top of a technology which is not owned by me. And so at any point, if this stops working, if this changes, if this gets more expensive to use, all my business model or my product, all my tool, all my software, my hardware might fail. And that's in fact one of the reasons that many big companies that you wouldn't expect embrace so much open source. Because when Samsung is putting Linux on their TVs, they know that actually Linux is not run by, let's say, Intel, and Intel suddenly will say, oh, I quit this Linux thingy because I won't allow Samsung to use it anymore. No, they won't get this kind of issues. So just think on that, because that's an interesting point about the perspective we look at open source. As you see, I'm trying to give more this kind of a standard vision and open source, let's say, and a startup guy could give you, and Victor the other one, so you get a little bit both of it.
Yeah, again, I did want to comment something about this. Also, like, I think to be like aware is that, you know, using open source doesn't mean that whatever you use is going to be maintained. Like, there's a lot of open source projects that actually fall into like maintenance hell, because like the maintainer, I don't know, like didn't want to maintain anymore, or like sometimes died, or like, I don't know, lost the access, or a lot of errors that happen where maintainers follow through. And so there's projects that are like, you know, on a limbo. So that could also happen even though you're using.
Bruno, your comment is really good. I think on this, let's say, path we are following now on, as I said, about users of open source as developers, no? And in there, just so you get it as a quick example, many times it happens, there's new tools, new software packages, new hardware that it's being promoted a lot as open source, but because it's part of a big company. For example, Intel might say they have a new board for IoT that's the best new Arduino you could buy. Take care, because many of these projects, even if they are open source, sometimes they are more a marketing operation than actually an open source product. And you might end up just putting all your efforts developing on top of a platform that afterwards is not supported by your community. And this is a daily process we all do. For example, working in projects like a Smart Citizen, right? We might think on adding a new feature, and to add this new feature, we might need a new dependency, a new library that will integrate into our software. Either it is a Python library or a Ruby library or a Java library, depending on what kind of software inside the platform we're working in. The first thing we do is to go to, let's say, GitHub and look how many stars it has, or look at references about it and how many commits and the latest commit, because you don't want to start building a new piece of software on top of a library that no one has updated since 2005. And so that's quite important. And especially as software, it's built more and more with this idea of dependencies, right? So to run, let's say, right, you download this code, which is a data logger for your Arduino, but it depends on the SD card library, which depends on the SPI library. And so if actually not all these dependencies are up to date, you might end up spending a lot of time fixing them, which is not bad. You can also contribute, and that's really nice, because when you see a project that has no contributions for years, you maybe look at a fork of it that someone actually took care of maintaining it on a site. But it's an interesting process, right? How we actually select open source as the tools we use also, and not just when we finish to build the tool, the way we'll release it to a community or to as a product, let's say, to
A
customers.
good example, I think, that we can use for talk about this is the slicer that a lot of people still uses, that Prusa now is maintaining, the Prusa slicer right now, but before it was just called a slicer with a 3 instead of an E. It was an open source project, very well maintained, very good project, but the guy that developed it stopped or make very slow the development of the software. But since it was a very good software and the source code was available, Prusa printers grab it and start working on top of it. And then you have a Prusa fork that now is very popular and very powerful and is based on previous one. If that software were closed source at the beginning, it will end there, no? It will die there. But of course, it's more common that you found open source abandoned or orphan projects than commercial ones. Because when a guy or a company starts doing business, they have a plan. And if they succeed, they maintain doing it. And if they don't succeed, they bury it from the beginning or very fast. And an open source is very common that I'm very eager to develop something to play music. And 2 months from now, I don't want to do that anymore. So I just leave it there. The good thing is if my software is good, someone else will take it and continue with it. No? And if my source wasn't open, that wouldn't be possible. No? But yeah, of course, there are advantages and disadvantages in each model. As a company that buys services, sometimes you prefer to be secure that if you pay, someone is going to answer you. No? And sometimes you want to be sure that no one is going to close or deny you the access to a tool that you are using. So this is not easy. It's not just this is the path and that's it. That's the one. No? I want to turn the discussion a little bit back to David, because he talked about Creative Commons, and I think this discussion is not only about principles but also about how this works. No? And Creative Commons, I think it's important to discuss. Creative Commons is not a type of license. At the end, with Creative Commons, you can make something fully closed or fully open, because you have to choose. Let's say share alike. That means that your license will be forcing people to share whatever derivative work they build on top. There's also non-commercial, but you can put or not put the non-commercial tag. That means that you can allow people to sell your work with Creative Commons or forbid them. So you can do all the full range of options with Creative Commons. And I'm just mentioning this in the terms that we have to be careful, because just saying I'm using Creative Commons doesn't mean anything. I'm using this kind of license with Creative Commons. No? And it's important because when you are choosing your license, you have to check all the details. It's not just that if I am using Creative Commons, I'm doing a license in this direction. No, it can be really different directions with Creative Commons. I don't think today class is the moment to review all the points, but just you can check them. There's a lot of documentation and websites that explains each point, but you have to choose attribution, commercial, Sharia alike or not, etc., etc. No?
I think that's also bringing to an interesting question. So I would like maybe to make a list from questions of all of you of what would be your concerns, or what would you worry about when you publish work as open? What would you like to, let's say, get back somehow, or at least what would you be your worries, let's say, in general? Like, would you worry that it's replicated by others, modified? Let's start mentioning different things.
By the way, if anyone is interested, I agree with Victor. I put it in the chat a simple schema of what you can choose with Creative Commons. I usually just don't put the commercial derivative because for an artwork or something like that is something like you want to stop because I have control of it, but you don't want to people to make something out of it. So it depends.
I guess what I wanted to ask was more about not the money that are made with the project, but let's say you're developing something and you need money to be able to develop it. So you need to pay the people to actually help you build it, or you need some tools or stuff like that. So you decide to apply for funding or look for investors. And I had this discussion with Anastasia, and she was telling me that applying for funding, you already need to have some kind of a protection, because what can happen, and she's seen that, is that basically people were trying to look for funding without any kind of protection, and they lost the project because someone just took it and ran away with it. So I would like to ask about like, what is the correct process and in what stage you should have it protected, and how, even though if you're planning open source still.
Well, from our experience, I mean, what I could add it is, and it's not the only answer, I would like to open it a little bit more, are two things. I extremely recommend when you are working in a project to be able to publicly release as much information about it in a platform that in a way states when you did so. So if you publish something into GitLab or GitHub, it's a way that it's stated that at this time, at this moment, let's say on time, this person actually contributed to this, right? You designed that 3D model. That's already, it's a way to start, I think, which in a way at least protects you, not fully legally, depending on the licensing you put into it, but at least it's saying that you build that, and that could help you. The other one is also about how you protect brands. I'm not a big fan of keep registering brands like big companies do, registering, let's say, stupid things. But it's also true that in the world we live in, where it might happen that someone just simply clones your project and just keeps even using the same naming, registering your name to actually be able to define, okay, Blender, it's a Blender, guys. It's not this Blender that this other company is trying to compete with. It's also a good starting point. Then actually investing the time into patenting, for example, your creation. I don't know when actually it's going to work, let's say, in favor of your project, so protecting you from a small or big companies to copy you, let's say, or when it's actually going to go against you, make you lose a lot of money, preventing a community of contributors to be built around, and especially like taking a lot of your time. Because it's not that this idea actually that we could have any great idea and no one else could copy it. There's a lot of moral, let's say, discussions we could have about it. But even if we forget about these ideas, it's not as obvious as it sounds. I mean, it's really hard to decide to say that something you built actually was designed by you and it's your idea and no one else could copy. Even legally, it's hard to do so. And you see this when you go around. I mean, this bottle is made by Decathlon, but sure, if I go to a bazaar in the corner shop, I would find one. And sure, let's say North Face might release one, and this just might change to, let's say, a different color and be a little bit more poshy. So at the end, we need to think that it's not also about putting licenses as these kind of like bureaucrats that panic about what's around. It's also about being smart in the way what you want to do and how you bring people into it and how you promote it.
Natalia, back like 2 years ago, I was working in the Fab Lab Seoul for 3 years, and one of the jobs that the Fab Lab does was a startup accelerator. And actually, we saw a lot of like project developments and to get products to the final market. Like actually, we saw like 20 business come up to life to real companies. And Korea is a really like Shenzhen-alike environment on the hardware and software development and products, and especially on IoT. And it's a shark market, actually. Like it's a kind of market that it's difficult to find a business and not get your ideas still in. So the biggest, from what I could understood, because
you never, like it was, we have really state departments, and you cannot go through one to another one, so you actually don't see the whole around of the product development. That's one of the biggest concerns they have. Another one is that actually they first make a, let's say, public release, as Guillem state, in like in GitHub or a public repository, so they can state that you have that. Sorry, there's a lot of noise. I'm going to close the window.
Sorry, I have a question.
So they actually like publish a little sneak peek to their product or the idea of what they were developing, but they were really careful on actually what they were releasing to the public. And one of the biggest and I think most successful approach is actually, that is also something that happens a lot in the startup, is make a state or shown in the public that the development was in a much advanced in the state that what they were in fact, not only to attract investors, but also to avoid that other competitors wants to like try to steal their product, because it's not the same that, let's say, for example, have idea how to develop a face mask that makes my face beautiful. That's an idea. But if you see a company that just has an idea and is showing you a little bit on how they plan to do it, it's not the same. To copy that, let's say, it's easy. But if you see that the company has already seen to release the market, has already the project under development, has already the stage onto the 10,000 units production a year, you are not going to be tempted to go into that market because you have already one competitor. Meanwhile, if the product is not completely development, you will not have that competitor. And basically you are in a race on which one is going to release that product first. So basically that's like, it's more like a poker game.
I mean, I think the good example, it's just, I mean, I think Edu's comment is really good on that. I mean, look at how let's say the Samsung and other, let's say, Android phones manufacturers have been copying Apple products for many years. I mean, these are companies with tons of money and they still succeed to do so. So imagine that the amount of lawyers Apple could actually put against Samsung and the ones that Samsung could put against Apple. But I mean, so at the end, what we are saying here is that, as Edu is saying, even if you have the power these companies have on patents, that doesn't guarantee that you. So in a way, maybe what these things are telling us, it's better to be fast. It's better to to test a lot of ideas, publish a lot of ideas. Maybe in one of them, you might find a community that might engage helping you. And you could turn one of these into a product. And even when I say product, or I mean something that actually provides you a revenue through any of the funding schemes that we are defining here. But this idea of being agile and promoting what you do, it's more important actually than maybe spending time closing what you do or protecting what you do using traditional methods, which links also into another discussion that maybe this conversation is not that much about open or close. It's about a more, let's say, it's about thinking more ahead on the future, where it's more when we would do something. There's many paths we could follow. All of them are valid, but what we cannot do for sure is just take the same pattern that was invented, let's say, for the Industrial Revolution more than 100 years ago.
Actually, like one of the biggest concern of most of the companies I saw funding, it was not on actually how to get the fundings, but on be the first one on the market with enough stable production chain that they knew already that the product will be copied and replicated in a cheaper and more successful way. So actually how to fight against that along their life cycle. Let's say they have released a product. For example, this product, I'm going to show in the link. I saw the full development of it. It's a smartwatch for blind people. They released the product, and actually the biggest concern is they didn't start publishing or like actually releasing information completely on it until they have a full chain production running with the cost running down on the production, and actually making the company more efficient. So when let's say another company will copy the product and change it and tweak it, they could fight against that. Actually, that was one of the biggest concerns for those companies, because they knew already that the product will be replicated or copied in a similar way or whatever. Like that happens. It's a reality. It's something that you cannot fight against it, even if you're Samsung. They will do it, and you can like send them like 1,000 lawyers, and they will still do it. Silence in the room.
I don't know, Oscar, if you want to have spend some time discussing the document you prepared about different licenses, so we can give an overview about actually what do we talk about, right? The particularities about when you choose a license or another.
Yeah, of course. Well, I'm going to share very briefly my screen so that you see where the links are. Share. Do you see my screen now?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, it's okay. Sorry, 1 second. I want to, something that Armand said before, I think, is, for example, you can develop software, because I have seen a lot in the drone community, that actually all the software in the drone community, like most of it, is completely open. And how actually you can gain incomes from that is actually to make them deploying package easy. Let's say all the source code of or most of the drone community is open, but actually how to install it, like as simple as an executable or a nice interface, they sell it. So actually you can download all the code and run it through command line, for example. But if you want to use let's say a simple interface and you don't want to mess up around with command lines, they actually offer you like, okay, you can buy the, let's say, executable for €1 or €2. And actually that's another way of making income of software.
Just something, sorry, I don't want to extend too much, but link not to what Edu said now, but what Edu said before, why it's extremely important for us to understand. It's the importance of the community that you build around whatever initiative you are trying. And that's extremely important, because if you look nowadays, the money that actually big companies are paying for other companies, let's say the value of companies, it starts to be more many times on the communities they built around, rather than the software stack, let's say the engineering part of it, right? And for example, in this way, you are saying about how you to protect yourself. If you actually created, let's say, a new, let's talk, as you said before, you mentioned Anastasia, let's imagine for a way here about bioplastics. We created that really nice collection of bioplastics. The best way to actually recognize the authorship of that collection is to create a big community of people that contributes to this same collection, that uses that collection, and that's actually the value that you're going to have, and that's how you're going to be recognized in a way. So just adding here, not like community, how it's also a part that we cannot remove from the game when we talk about licenses, especially in the world we live in, where we are not anymore in our garages just inventing something. We are more connected, let's say, and building things together. That's it.
And actually about communities, Guillem, sorry to extend myself, but years ago I was really like into a community of Thingiverse. Thingiverse is everybody as just a repository to download files, but I used to contribute a lot and get feedback. And actually have like a lot of designs there that I just publish because I want to share them. And some projects have been like shown in some magazines. And actually last year, Yo, as a sneak peek from another one of the community that was stating that my designs that were like Creative Commons but non-commercial were being sold on 2 web pages. So actually, how I get that in the worldwide that 6,000 million people, like how to control that your products are not being sold, for example, is through a community, because that community like warn me, okay, send me an email, okay, hey, your designs are being sold on a page and you have this kind of Creative Commons license. So my way to act is actually I wrote to the companies that were selling the product and say, hey, this project could not be sold. You can fabricate it and give it for free if you want, but you cannot sell it. And actually took it out from the web pages without getting to get into with lawyers and etc.
Congratulations.
I mean, but Edu, still, they could have refused, right? Like if you send like a nice email, hey,
exactly,
stop.
They could have refused completely. But I'm just stating like my case that happened to me last year actually, and was like that.
Nice. Okay.
Yeah, in that case, it's something like Neil said. So even if the lawyer thing is kind of difficult, for example, in this case, there is a community around that says, hey, this web page steals things. So maybe it's another campaign against that web
Exactly.
page
Public
that
pressure.
is public pressure. So this kind of thing of public pressure kind of leverage something. So maybe if it's, I don't know, a Lebanese web page that does its things forever and doesn't care about the World Wide Web, maybe it doesn't work for it. But usually these kind of webs try to sell it all over the world, so the world pressure affects them.
I think, let me weigh in a little bit just to change this, use this as an excuse to discuss a little bit the language we use. For example, when you use the word steal, this is very funny because you're talking about the concept of the stealing from behind, from as an historic concept, no? Of taking something from someone else. And if you do it virtually, the same word is a little bit confusing, no? Because if for example, start selling Edu's design, I'm not removing anything from Edu's pocket, no? I'm not taking anything from Edu's world. I'm just replicating something in a way that doesn't affect Edu. If he doesn't know, he doesn't be affected, no? So I think we should be very careful and we should understand well the concepts, and they are not directly translatable, let's say, from the world that happened 50 years ago. And all these concepts are built on top of that world, not on top of the world that we live in today.
Because
yeah,
I'd say even if it doesn't affect Edu directly, in an indirect way, it kind of steals his consumers, no? Like.
But why do you think that those guys will be consuming Edu's products?
Because they're concerned, like in many cases, they're concerned with the end product and not really where they buy it from or who they get it from.
Could be, yeah.
Also,
but at the end,
saying...
Edu is not asking for any money in exchange for his work. So at the end, he's not losing anything, no?
Mm.
What I'm saying is the only fool here is the guy that bought the product because he can get it for free from Edu's original post, no? But in fact, between Edu, that as a creative person, and the guy that's ripping him apart, there's no stealing of anything. No?
Edu, were they paying for the design files or for something that was made?
For the design files.
There's like, for example,
sorry, go ahead.
So for example, like, you know how a lot of companies recently, or a lot of makers recently came up with a lot of face shields, like 3D printed and laser cut versions, and then everyone makes their like own versions of it and like adds it back to the community. Like recently here, for example, you know, the 3D printed versions that Prusa made, and then here what's happened, like in my city or even like around, is a lot of companies who had the ability to do so started selling those at a big scale, the exact same things, like, which seems like a very ethically uncool thing to do, you know.
Well, I insist that we should try to create ethics around the new reality and not around the reality that we are used to in terms of physical stuff. When you have some physical stuff and I took it from you, you don't have any more of that stuff. But in digital world, that doesn't happen the same. No, if I took something from someone else, he still has it. No, if I make a copy of my movie, then I give it to you, you have a movie and I still have a movie. So this idea that you're avoiding me to sell more is just something that you suspect will happen, but it's not a real fact. It's just this idea that if you weren't doing that, I will get more money from people. But that's just an assumption. It's not a reality, at least not still, no? What I'm trying to say is, I'm not saying I am right and you are wrong in terms of each case. Each case could be different. What I'm saying is you don't have the facts to say that someone, because he is giving a song for free on the internet, is avoiding the record company to make money. You know, do I explain myself?
I think it's important to think a little bit radically here. Radically in the sense of, if we actually want to explore how the future could look, it's important that we actually take these kind of principles as intellectual property really serious. And being serious means understanding how we can protect them, but also why we protect them. And so in there, let me just put you a quick example, and I don't want to extend too much, but what about if tomorrow a company clones a smart citizen, succeeds to make it cheaper, a lot of people around the world starts to use them, and suddenly this move from being a small project with around 2,000 sensors of being a project with 2 million sensors deployed around the world. You might say, well, Guillem, you are making money out of it, and you might not have this money. Well, first, we don't know, because maybe as the people who's been building that project for many years, I think that their expertise could contribute and still make, let's say, still we have tons of way to sustain us without even having to move to a new venture, just staying within that venture as people who are experts. And now there's a market of 2 million, not just of 2,000. But still, I think we all get really happy, because what we've been promoting, right, it's not to make money. We've been promoting to have resources to survive, of course, because we need to eat and we need an apartment. But mostly what we have been promoting, it's actually an idea that finally it's true. No, finally it's there. So we need to think that way too, no? Because if not, we are also limiting ourselves. We have our ideas that we want to, let's say, this is at the end, it will be like a musician that spends all his life just suffering because no one stealing from him and not actually being interested in people listening to his music in a way, no? So, of course, these things are really radical the way I'm saying them, and there's a lot of grace in between. But it's important that we take into account, if we want to do it to create impact, if Edu actually added something to Thingiverse, which is successful to fight the COVID, and then it starts to be cloned and sell all over the world, the important thing in there is that people is making money, yes, but no one is creating a scarcity out of what Edu did. So at the end, we are maximizing the impact of it.
I think just to close this, in the document that Oscar put you, I pasted a link yesterday, and the title is Non-Commercial with an interrogation mark, and it's an analysis from Lady Ada. That's her model from Adafruit, the girl that started and is pushing Adafruit around exactly this matter. No, and I think her word is very important because she had made a big business around this. No? And she has strong opinions about being non-commercial or allowing everyone to sell your work or not. No? So I recommend you that reading as a good analysis of it.
I wanted to ask something, sorry, maybe before Oscar starts, of what Guillem was saying. Maybe in the case of the smart citizen, what would happen? I'm thinking in a model in which I could open source the design, but I could be the owner of the data. So for example, let's say that a lot of people copies the Smart Citizen kit, but they still need to connect to the platform or the webpage that Smart Citizen. Can I still be the owner of the data? Like in my case, I'm interested in sensing for agriculture, but maybe I could open the design because for me, it's interesting that a lot of people uses them. And with all the information and the different ways they use them, they're gonna help me feed like a database, which is what I think it's more powerful. More than my design, it's the data I'm gonna gather for the world.
It's exactly what Google does every day.
Yeah, at the end, your information, it's not more, let's say the information from sensors at the end, it's nothing different than the information, for example, that users are contributing to any social media platform. And in these cases, usually what happens, right, is that there's an agreement. No, when you register to a platform, you sign an agreement with that platform in the way who owns the data you will actually basically give to them. No, either the data that you give to them in a, let's say, a more formal way. I'm uploading a picture, but also all this data that they are tracking in the way you are looking at others' pictures. No, and these are big discussions. So it's true that at the end, when we talk now about any tool, we might be considering not just in terms of licensing how we deal with actually this hardware or this software, even if the software is running on the cloud, so you are just interfacing with it. But on top of that, all the data that's going to be stored there, the one you contribute directly and the one that's going to be collected by you indirectly, let's say. And so this is an important topic. And it's true that you could find business models around it. For example, in the case of a smart citizen, now we are considering that for some more professional sensors we are building called the stations, if you own one and you want the calibration algorithms to run automatically for you on the platform, you will need to pay because this costs server time. But if you can also download the software and run it yourself. So you could run the software in your computer, you can install it and run it once every day or once every month. But actually, if you want, as this costs money for us, and we need a way to actually make it sustainable, people will need to pay for them if they want us to run this code for them, no? Still, the data in this case being owned by them. But the, data and ownership are really interesting topics. It's something maybe but for a different class too. Because there's a lot, and there's a lot of, let's say, discussion right now, a bit like it was on open source maybe 10 years ago, which still it is. I'm not saying there's nothing open source right now, but data, it's a really big topic nowadays.
Okay.
Please ask questions.
I want to ask something. So earlier you talked about the public release. Is this the same as filing invention or something like this, or it's different?
You talk about what, sorry?
Public release, like putting something, a project in a GitHub or something like that. Is it like filing a project or it's different?
It just works because if there's a discussion later on who invented what, and you have a proof that you release some work previously, then you have arguments to say, no, that's my work. No, it has a name for it. I don't recall the name. Previous, whatever, maybe but someone recalls it.
Even though that the GitHub repository might not have any like a license.
Yeah, the only thing you are proving with that is that you did it before. There's still no license on it, but to be able to patent something, you have to demonstrate that you are the first guy to come out with that idea. And if someone else has a previous work on that, then you cannot claim originality on that idea. So if you release something before the company tries to patent that, you can claim, no, that was my idea, not them. No? That's mainly the issue. So I don't know, there's a lot of information in that document that Oscar compiled, and I think there's a lot of interesting readings around open source and different kinds of open source license and closed source license. And yeah,
I think the best thing, I don't think that the best we could do right now is to go through the document and bore you with all the details in there. But just feel free to go to it. Is in you know where the class documentation is, week 13 intellectual property, and there's a link there for IP notes. There we talk about the different schemes, and we focus mainly on the distinction between two terms, like correct me if I say this wrong, but copyleft licenses and permissive licenses. These two schemes that we have not mentioned yet might help you a little bit, make a little bit of distinction between what license to pick for your own project. Generally, permissive licenses are like the ones that you know as BSD or MIT licenses, and are licenses that don't require the project that you make to have the same licensing scheme as the one that you inherited from. For example, if you use GCC and or let's put another example, if you use a software that has an MIT license for your project, you don't have to release your project as the same license as the one that you used. But for example, if you take a project that has a GNU GPL license, then you have to apply the same license scheme because they say that any derivative from that work needs to have the same license as the one that you took it from. As I said, there are many ranges in there. Just to give you an example, I think that Smart Citizen is released with GPL, if I'm right, at least for the software part, and the hardware part is for CERN Open Hardware License V1, if this is correct, Guillem or Victor, I think.
I don't recall the version, but yeah, it's CERN.
Yeah, if you go to docs.smartcitizen, you'll find them there on the homepage. I paste that in here.
And the firmware and the platform is GPL.
Exactly, but basically, just to repeat it, because the hardware, it's CERN using version 1.2, the open hardware license promoted by CERN, the same people that sponsors Kicad. Then the software that runs inside the devices, it's the standard GPL version 3, as many, let's say, software components running in your Linux computer or in the Linux server around the world. The software platform, it's in a specific kind of GPL called AGPL, which it's more meant for platforms where you don't run them, let's say, into something that you own. So when you access Smart Citizen, right, your browser, it's connecting to a platform running a code that's not on your laptop, right? It's on our servers. And so to protect these cases, AGPL adds some specifications that help prevent others from forking your software, running it on their servers, and not offering the source code to the users, because in a way, they are not using it fully. And then we also use Creative Commons for some of the documentation and other parts. Sometimes we use we use a non-commercial, sometimes we use commercial. And I have to say that I'm quite happy about moving everything to commercial, because at the end, it's the best way to promote. If not, it would never happen that a company will succeed to sell 2 million devices cloning or work.
Maybe it's good that we try to just make an abstract of the full things that we have discussed in terms of license, because at the end it seems like a really big and complex world, but it's not that much. No, at the end you have closed things or proprietary license where you have the right to decide who use things and how much they have to pay or what do they have to give in exchange for using it, and you don't allow them to release what they are using to anyone else without your permission. That's one side, what is called copyright, let's say. Then you have the side of open source, but inside open source there's a full range of things. But I'm going to try to just say very simply the main stuff. No, one thing is the big discussion is non-commercial or commercial. If you go to the definitions of open hardware license or open source license, non-commercial is non-considered an open source license, okay? Everything that is claimed to be open source, but it says non-commercial, if you go to the official definitions, is not open source. So I'm going to put non-commercial on the side of closed source, because at the end is closed source, and non-commercial doesn't allow you to do anything but use it. If you take something that's patented, you can also use it at home and no one will sue you. So at the end is very similar to non-commercial thing. And then on the other side, what is accepted as open source, you have what Oscar was explaining, is mostly what Creative Commons call Sharia-like. that means that I force you to share your work if you are using my work. So if you are using someone else's work, you have to share also. That's copyleft, let's say, GPL, all those licenses that force you to inherit the sharing thing. So you are not free to close something if you use my work. That's what those licenses claim to the users. And the other side is what they call permissive license that doesn't care about that, allowing you to close your work, even if it is on top of someone else's work, let's say. No, I think more or less for me those are the main parts. Obviously, there's a lot of details in each thing, and most of open source license, I think all of them demands you attribution. So you claim that everyone that uses your work should say that it is your work in the work itself, and you can even specify how do you want that to be shown. And I think that's more or less the big picture. I don't know if someone else wants to add something to that abstract, but
what would be your picks for licenses for your project? The ones, I don't know, for example, Bruno, that you are thinking about making such a big, let's say, device with quite a complex setup and everything. What are your thoughts about this?
You always pick me as an example. I don't know why. I feel
It's
like
not fair.
favoritism. Yeah. No, I mean, I would probably use like the open hardware licenses. There's this company I really like. They make modular synthesizers. They're called Mutable Instruments. They're super popular in the Euro-Rack community. It's like some super niche thing, but basically they did great. They're like super popular and they sell a lot of stuff, but all their hardware is open hardware, and they publish like schematics. They have all the build materials, build guide for everything they do. So I'll probably go that route, right? Like having open hardware and open source software too, like both, the hardware and the firmware. But then obviously I would like to like try to sell it if I could. So maybe I guess the benefit of doing something like that, like the added benefit of selling it, of what I would sell, it would be probably like having the full thing already assembled, against for someone to have to download the schematics, build buy the components, build them themselves. So I feel like that alone should be enough for someone to be able to like say, okay, instead of like doing myself, maybe I'm not feeling like it, so let's just buy it. It's gonna be easier. So yeah, I feel like that would be a nice way.
You mentioned multiple instruments, and something cool about them is that as they release some of the source code from the hardware synthesizers open source, there's another platform now for virtual synthesizers, so software ones. They've been just able to fork the code from them that runs in hardware and put it in software and create a virtual version of their synthesizers. But this actually is contributing to them selling more because people test them in software and then actually people want to buy them in hardware. So imagine what kind of like cool things it allows, this kind of idea of people building upon other people's code, no?
Yeah, of course. And there's like a bunch of stuff that came out of them like doing the open thing. Like there's a lot of stuff, like guys that just took their modules and then maybe did some changes and take out some other modules. And there's like, as you say, the software version of their own modules. And there's also like a lot of stuff with like they're having like hidden modes in their software. So the actual modules have like actual like hidden code in there. But because the source is open, like people can actually go through the code and see there's like, oh, there's a hidden mode in here. So they know how to use it. But there's like no manual everywhere on how to do that. But the people still find it because it's open source. Yeah, like I think I would probably follow like that route. Like I feel like Mutable Instruments is like my, my objective, my dream of this stuff like that.
And
How do you write it? What's the name?
interesting?
Let me put the link in the chat. Yeah.
And what's interesting with mutable instrument, it's only one person running the whole thing, like designing, printing, and assembling modules. Only one person, but because of the community, that person, Emily, is very successful because of the community she make around her. It's a very good.
I think what you said is interesting also in the way about it's not fully connected to intellectual property, but in a VTT, it's at least connected in the way we think and manage projects. When we are capable of working with communities and understanding that a tool for a community doesn't need to be a product, like something that is closed in a box with instructions, fully closed, you don't have access to it and you buy it in Amazon. That instead could be something that you buy apart from someone, then you finish it, putting something that you do by your own, that you have the right to access the insight to enhance it. Suddenly the idea of the product as it was invented 150 years ago, maybe with the Industrial Revolution and with massive production of objects, changed completely. And this, of course, affects licensing. So another reason, right, why we need to reconsider licensing, because we are starting to find ways of making things that allow a single person to run a company that makes hardware, which was in a way unbelievable, at least for the electronics industry some years back.
Just to add on your model, the model that you're choosing, at the end, what you said about you think no one is going to try to replicate your hardware. I think you're right. If you don't grow too much, like Arduino did, for example, then we can talk with our experience in a Smart Citizen. No one has came out to start selling Smart Citizen kits just because they can do it, no? Because it's not a big business in terms of just producing the PCBs. No, nowadays it's pretty easy to do that. So this is the full concept what people is attracted for. So I don't think you're in risk in that matter, unless you grow so much that you start selling thousands of devices a month. No, then you are in danger that someone else is going to start selling them cheaper. But then you are so big that you will have a lot of other resources to make the living out of it, I think. Just to say that I think that your route is very good.
Great, great. Thanks. What about the other guys? Anybody else?
For example, I don't know, Tue, Benji, Antoine, I don't know, other MDev people as well, if they're thinking about making something related to hardware or some software for in the future, not even in the scope of our academy. I'm afraid that a lot of people that just have their names there, but they're not there.
Well, to be honest, this is not my favorite topic. But maybe if there's something that I will take a look at, will be the like open hardware, something open hardware, like I'm reading about like the CERN or something like that, but I'm not sure right now.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't really thought about it. I haven't thought about it much because I kind of changed my idea lately, and I'm not really sure how to think about it. Just so people kind of want to make like some, I guess, parametric furniture with plants in it. And I mean, nothing is kind of new. There's no new ideas, just kind of combining things that already exist. So my view of it is more something like OpenDesk or one of these websites where you can just download the plans and it's free. But then if you want somebody to make it, then you can pay, I don't know if I'd be the one making it for people or you find makers to make it. But then I think everything again, like would be open source because it's just kind of, I don't really see what can be closed in it. And in general, I'm for open source. So I would want to stop people from doing it. And also I'm pretty bad designing furniture. So I think it'd be good to have it open source so people can be like, hey, it's a good idea. But you know, here's some contribution. That's something that you can't do, but I could help with. By the way, if anybody knows how to design, I'm looking for some help.
I can do graphic design, but not furniture. So if you need that, let me
It's
know.
very similar. It can port easily.
And you plan to make a living of this project, or is just
No, not really. I mean, who knows, but it wasn't a plan. It's more like an idea. I think, like, at the moment, I'm just designing one armchair, but I think it would work quite well if there were different products. And like, if there was a table, if there was an armchair, if there was a sofa, if there was like this. And for this to happen, I think you need a bit more time than just kind of like doing a one-time project. You need to work on it for a bit longer term. And it's not something, I don't think I would ever want to do just one project. I probably just in general work on different things to kind of stay interested and busy. But I haven't really thought about it more than I wouldn't want to make a website and have some kind of like nice branding and it looking like a brand, but it doesn't mean that it would be a business or an income source, or at least not yet. It's not the aim. I'm not banking on it.
Mm-hmm. Any other people before we jump into some conclusions and we close up? I see a lot of people like, I don't know, Laura, Andrea, Adele, Zoe, Magdalena.
I think we are so far out intellectually that it's hard to wrap a head around the licensing when we are not 100% sure where we are going with the project itself. So that's why we are so quiet.
But think really like, I mean, especially for those of you, I mean, please don't feel excluded here, but especially for the ones of you on the Master for Design and Emergent Theaters, intellectual property is an issue by itself. It's an issue to be designed by itself, to be rethink by itself. So don't think that it's about following what's out there. It's about also finding new ways to actually accomplish your objective, either it is to be super rich, either it is to generate a community of contributors around, either it is to maximize the impact of your proposal, but think twice on it because it's extremely important. Yeah, and this extends to all the FAP Academy students too, but I said MDev particularly as since the first term, you started to work a lot on this idea of how we actually rethink the future and this perspective, let's say, approach we need to have when we design.
Yeah,
yeah, I think just one thing here, which maybe would be, let's say, so I think at Fowler we have been quite successful promoting between our students or community or let's say researchers, so as the Fab Lab community, to promote open source. People here, usually when they finish on piece of work, they contributed to open platforms, usually using open licenses, even in fields where usually open source came far later, like maybe design and architecture, etc. But what we are missing a little bit to do is to be able to successfully develop open source communities around our project. So communities that engage to contribute. So I guess the next goal we need to achieve is not just you to release your, let's say, tools in an open license way, but also to have the time and the resources and the motivation to create a community of people around whatever you are building that helps actually the project to be sustainable. Even thinking that the objective should be you not having to be involved for the project to keep impacting, let's say, on society or delivering what your purpose is.
I feel marketing or something is something that a lot of makers don't have in mind or should have in mind, because you can make something awesome. If nobody knows about it, it's a bit useless. And I think a lot of people in the Fab Lab and everywhere just come up with really great ideas, and you know them and you know they exist, but it's just sad that nobody knows about them, and kind of everybody works on their own side, developing their own projects, super clever ones, but that kind of are either done multiple times around the world. So I don't know if it'd be nice to have like a maker's guide to marketing or to getting your idea outside or getting it known or something. I mean, I guess it's just very simple marketing, which is not exactly what we enjoy doing, but I don't know if there's ideas.
Well, yes, I think this is also a very big issue, especially when you look at the platforms like Kickstarter and all those funding platforms, and then looking at how a lot of them basically became like a trial to get VC money and like business money, and this is just the validation of ideas, and as well how much money you actually need nowadays also to successfully crowdsource your idea. I mean, it just
For one
shows
example,
how
maybe
close it is.
you began. Sorry. Keep going.
I just wanted to sum up like this great ideas get co-opted on so many different levels by capitalism, basically.
Well, very quickly, maybe you, Guillem, that you were on the origins of the project. You can give some notes about crowdsourcing and the experience that you had with Goteo, was it the platform you used?
Okay. So funding more than intellectual property. Well, I mean, we, as Smart Citizen, started first as a small test that was self-funded for a course here at YAC. So we got money from one studio to actually develop around 10 sensors for the students to use. From there, we decided that it was good to actually scale and build something that was, let's say, that we could manufacture easily, and so that we could actually test with the local community in Barcelona, not just with 10, so with hundreds. We did the crowdfunding in Goteo, which is a local platform for crowdfunding that promotes projects that, let's say, have a positive impact on society, or in this idea of more of common good, let's say. And then from there, we decided that instead of being on the local scale of Barcelona, it was good actually to grow to the scale, the worldwide scale, let's say. So we went and worked with Kickstarter and did a campaign there. So the first campaign in Goteo raises around 13K, and the one in Kickstarter, I remember in dollars, but in euros might be less than 60K, but around 60K, let's say. I have to say that the impact of the Kickstarter campaign, more than actually being able to generate the funding that we needed to finalize successfully the development, help us to spread our idea. So I would consider this crowdfunding campaign, of course, it sustained it itself because it allowed us to deliver the device to many people, and so to build a worldwide community. But at the same time, it didn't cover actually all the development costs. So what I'm saying here is that when you go to crowdfunding, it's really important to budget things properly, especially if your product requires a lot of development. And I think it's more interesting sometimes in this kind of hardware crowdfundings to understand that your crowdfunding is more actually into spreading, let's say, kind of as a pre-sale at the end, no? And using a Kickstarter to spread your idea rather than actually aiming at funding fully all the development. And in a way, you have to do the homework a little bit in advance, and otherwise, if not, you'll fail. And that's in fact the reason many Kickstarter projects fail, even if they actually succeed to get a lot of money, because it's hard to do hardware and it's hard to actually scale it properly. From there on, just to finish, Smart Citizen has been funded by the people buying the kits and by research projects that contributed to this. And this is really good because thanks that we, let's say, did a lot of research projects, and we are fully committed, and not just us, so the European Commission, when it gives you public funding, it's pushing you to really things in open source, because of course, if we are making things with money which all of you paid, it's important that all of you could benefit in a way or another. So that actually, it's also really interesting, and just as a final close, sorry, I'm talking a lot, how, let's say, public institutions could and are the promoters of open source. They should be more, they could be much more. Some started, and I think that's extremely important. It doesn't make any sense, right, that Barcelona City Council invests a lot of your money that you pay in taxes to build an application, and then that you cannot even look at how this application is built, nor other city councils could build it. And we start here, it's, let's say, when you think twice, it's one of the biggest mistakes you could do. You don't know even how they do it so often. Open source and the public administration, it's something that I hope, it's one of the battles I think still will win.
Guillem, I'm guessing that the crowdfunding also kind of helps validate the demand for certain products in a different marketplace, for example.
Yeah, completely. The only thing is that also it's important to understand, usually the persons who use these platforms is also a niche in a way, if you think about how the world it's built, right? It's let's say it's usually this person with an academic background and an interest in technology that actually access to it. So it's important, because if you just focus to them, you can end up delivering a certain kinds of products that also don't represent a lot of the other population in the world, let's say, that's not interested in these particular bits and bytes. But it's true. It's one of the best ways to test how it's scaled and also to assume the risk, even if it's really risky sometimes, because actually people expect things to work and you need to commit a lot to it.
Well, guys, I think it's time to start wrapping up. Do you have any other thoughts or any other questions you would like to ask before we jump into some conclusions?
Maybe one small thing, which yesterday Neil talked about incomes and different ways of incomes, like services or I don't know, he listed quite a lot. I don't know if we talked a lot about intellectual property, but we didn't talk much about actually taking a product to market or real life or using it different incomes. I don't know, maybe, I think it's a big subject. We can't start right now, but I don't know if maybe you had like something built on the class page or some graphics or something that could be good to read through that kind of makes you think about how to earn money.
I think Victor at the beginning of the session gave I don't know, 2, 3, 4 models of funding. Like one of them was maybe Victor, you can complete because you really love these things and know them better than I do. But the Blender model by donations, and he has clear numbers. So Blender Foundation, basically, I don't know how much money you said, but roughly like 90,000 euros per month just by donations, and that they just develop software and pay 20, 30 developers out of that. Other models, like what you could see as, for example, he has the same from research funding for the Smart Citizen or similar things like that, or just selling your product, as Bruno was mentioning earlier, like you fully release your hardware and as open, but the convenience of just getting the final product the same way as we do with Smart Citizen, or the same thing that modular, I don't know the name, or Adafruit, or Sparkfun does with their designs in electronics, or Raspberry Pi and these other ones. So I don't know if I'm leaving anything behind. Services as well for analysis, for like extra support. Like, for example, if you want like more advanced features, or not worry about how to, for example, run WordPress on your local instance, but do it on WordPress services or servers. That also like another income model, because you don't target only to very specific niche in which people are able to build everything by themselves, but also there's like people that want to build on top of what you work or did already, and that service is already something that you can sell. I don't know, Victor, if you can add something.
Yeah. For example, Red Hat was a company that was bought by IBM, I think, last year. One of the biggest transactions in software, in open source software world, and they grow just offering services around, but not, I'm not talking about web services, but support services, no, to companies, because they release everything as open source, but the companies needed a custom version for their own whatever, and they needed some courses for their employees to learn how to use that software. And what I'm saying is that sounds like a really small, but it grew on one of the biggest companies, you know, of releasing software as free. And also another example that I would like to pop out is Prusa printers. Prusa printers is not a big company as you can imagine, but it's a really strong company, and it has a lot of employees, and they release everything open source, and they just sell what they do. The thing is, if you keep innovating fast enough, all the people that's copying you will always be one step behind you. No? So they use this technique. It's the same idea as Adafruit and SparkFun mostly. They are trying just to push innovation in a way that who's copying them is always a little bit behind. And they are succeeding on doing it in I think, in a good grade. No? Maybe they are not becoming Apple, but also that's not their goal. So they are more chasing like a educative companies that promote education, that promote learning, etc. And they are getting enough money to do that and also to be rich. Because if you think about the owners of Adafruit, SparkFun or whatever, they have enough money to buy a yacht. It's not that your dreams are canceled because you try to do better things. No?
Okay, guys. Well, I think now, if there's no more questions or comments, I think it's time to close the session. You have all the notes in the FAACAE website, and there's also a HackMD that we complete little by little, but the same, I just copied the HackMD into the documentation this morning, and it's all up to date. I hope that you have clearer ideas now about licensing, intellectual property in general, and that also this discussion has triggered some more deeper questions about how these models work, not only in the practical level, just to pick a license, and that at least this week is not just like a very soft week in which you just pick a license and that's it, but that also just you have some other thoughts about it, and even if they're not like super advanced yet, but you can still have these things going on in your head. And that's pretty much I have to say. I'd like to thank, well, first of all, every one of you coming, and also Guillem and Victor for your time. And I think it's not anything that it costs you a lot of effort, because I guess that you like to talk about these things a lot. And we remain again at your available for you. So if you want to also contact the other guys as well for these type of things, we are more than happy to give you a hand. Okay.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Edu, I guess that he will put the recording on the class.
Thank you, everyone.
Yes.
Thanks so much. Bye.
MDEF is working.
Thank you very much. It's been really nice. We are always available to solve any more questions and topics on that issues. Have a nice